Welcome to Classical Austin. I'm Diane Donovan, and on today's show, we'll highlight Ballet Austin's upcoming performances of In Motion, celebrating the choreography of Stephen Mills. Later on in the show, we'll hear from Shira Cion of Kitka. They will be in town to perform one of our noonday concerts, February 17th. We'll learn all about what they do and listen to some of the music. And later in the show, I have an interview with classical music fan, KMFA fan, Jack Hues, yes, of the band Wang Chung. He'll let us know about his musical journey, including some of the classical music that has influenced him. Now's a great time to find a comfortable chair, sit back, relax, and enjoy Classical Austin. In celebration of Stephen Mills' 25th anniversary with Ballet Austin, they will be presenting 3 of his ballets, handpicked by Mills himself, and that's under the title Motion. It'll start off with the Pink Confetti Dance, then 4 Mortal Men, and finally Liminal Glam. The performances will take place February 13th through the 15th. And we will hear from Stephen Mills himself from previously recorded interviews, including one that I recorded at the start of the 2025-2026 season. This is your 25th season as artistic director of Ballet Austin, and there you are on that beautiful silver cover of this year's magazine brochure. Yes. I'm very much interested in learning about In Motion, an evening with Stephen, and that'll take place February 13th through the 15th.
Sure. The season for me, it's like 25 years is a milestone, and it's a long time. But I didn't want to dwell on myself, because I'm a firm believer that nobody does anything alone. And I wanted to really take the opportunity to celebrate all the collaborators that I've been able to work with over the years, but most importantly, the dancers that I've collaborated with over the years. So each of the works in the February series are works that are personally important to me. And we have a dance called the Pink Confetti Dance. It was the very first dance that we showed when we came back from COVID. Right. Everybody was in masks, and we were on stage throwing pink confetti around, happy to be out of our homes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, indeed. Here now is Stephen Mills from 2021 talking about joy and the confetti dance, about a year and a half into the pandemic. So how will you bring us joy with the 3 happy dances? What do we have?
Well, I think that, during the past, 16 to 18 months, we've all been struggling in lots of different ways, right? Yep. And finding those moments to connect back to ourselves, our culture, our community, is really important, and to do it in a happy way. And I mean, what's more joyful than dancing, right? Right? When nobody's watching, we dance, right?
Oh, and sometimes when they are watching.
And when they are watching, right.
These dances will start with the Pink Confetti Dance. Would you tell us about that?
So the Pink Confetti Dance is a dance to the music of the Third Brandenburg Concerto, Bach, and it's just upbeat and happy, and I can't give away the surprise of the dance, but it's probably in the title,
I think so.
The Pink Confetti Dance. But it's just this wild happiness of this just letting everything go and sort of purging the last 16 months from our brains and looking forward and being happy.
Oh, yes, that. Bach's music, why not? Over the years, we've talked, and the fact that Bach's music is so danceable, as is like modern composers, contemporary composers like Steve Reich and like Arvo Pärt.
Right.
There's something, I do find something similar, even though centuries have passed. But
Right. Well, it's good music, composed well,
right.
And thoughtfully played. So, well, first of all, Bach is hands down my favorite composer.
Went a little bit back in time to hear what Stephen Mills had to say about the Pink Confetti Dance just before its premiere. February 13th through the 15th, Ballet Austin will be presenting 3 ballets by Stephen Mills. What will be the second ballet in the program?
Then the second work on the program is called 4 Mortal Men. It's from a work that I did in 2018 called Exit Wounds, which is a very, very personal work to me that I am so happy to share with the audience. It's very dramatic. It's sad in many ways, but for me, it's the story of resilience. That's the thing that is most important in the work.
And Four Mortal Men chronicles the life of four men living in New York during the AIDS crisis, and it's about survival and great loss. Stephen Mills said a little bit more about this piece when it was about to have its premiere.
Which revolves around this idea of choosing courage over fear. You know, Winston Churchill said that fear is a reaction, courage is a decision, and we live in a time where we need to start to make more courageous decisions.
Tell us about the final ballet on the program.
And then we close the evening with a work called Liminal Glam, which uses the music of Philip Glass. And I chose this work because we haven't done it since 2016, and the last time we performed it was on a month-long tour the company did of China. So it was one of our biggest tours, and so Philip's work has been very consequential in my own practice, and so I wanted to include some music of his.
Yeah, I noticed that in your work, and that use of often repetitive themes. Graham Reynolds does it, and even Bach, it works
for sure.
in a similar way. You've just heard excerpts of conversations I've had with Stephen Mills over the years, and I mentioned that he's celebrating his 25th year with Ballet Austin, but that's as artistic director. He was there a couple of years prior. The performance is celebrating some of his choreography, will take place February 13th through the 15th at the Long Center for the Performing Arts. You can get more information at balletAustin.org. The Pink Confetti Dance will feature Bach's Brandenburg Concerto No. 3, and from that now, here is the third movement. Giovanni Antonini led Il Giardino Armonico in a performance of Bach's Brandenburg Concerto No. 3 in G major, and we heard the third movement. That will be the music for the first ballet that Ballet Austin will be performing February 13th through the 15th. It's titled Pink Confetti. And cheers to Stephen Mills for all the joy and beauty he's brought us through his choreography with Ballet Austin. And I've had the pleasure of interviewing him for the last 23 years. You're listening to Classical Austin. I'm Diane Donovan. You've been hearing about the ensemble Kitka and the fact that they will be coming through Austin to perform at the Draylen Mason Music Studio on February 17th, 12 noon, one of our special noonday concerts. They are promoting a brand new album, Kolo, which is a Proto-Baltic Slavic word for circle, which has a lot of meaning in this group. And I'm so very pleased to be chatting with the executive and artistic director, Shira Cion. Welcome.
Such a pleasure to be here with you, Diane. We can't wait to come to Austin.
About the group, you have interesting vocal techniques from Eastern Europe and Eurasia, and you were founded in 1979. How long have you been associated with Kitka?
Well, I'll be aging myself, but I joined Kitka in 1988. Oh. So I've been singing with the group for 37 plus years.
Wow.
One of the things that's special about Kitka is we are a multi-generational ensemble of 10 women. We range in age from 22 to 71. And that sort of reflects the way this music has traditionally been passed on between women in the places that inspire our repertoire, from grandmother to daughter to granddaughter, across decades. And so we like to keep that tradition alive in our own group culture. So the geographic area that we're talking about are Balkan, Baltic, Slavic, some Mediterranean, and Caucasian lands. But we also are not purely tied to strictly traditional harmony singing forms. We also love to innovate and make these songs our own through original arrangements of traditional material, by commissioning contemporary composers to write original music for the ensemble, which is inspired by the very unique sort of musical idioms that are indigenous to these song forms. So you mentioned our unique palette of vocal techniques, which can be described, well, it's hard to generalize because we cover a broad geographic area, and even within any small country, there's many diverse vocal styles and techniques. And then to generalize broadly, we tend to use what is sometimes called a clear voice technique or an open throat technique, a folky style of vocal production, which is different than your classical bel canto sort of head voice with vibrato, or your more classical choral technique. It's a little more earthy and gritty and buzzy and forward. Actually, it's a sound that folks in Texas are probably quite accustomed to because it shows up a lot in country music and mountain music. So I think it'll really resonate with the Austin community. And this music is also characterized by very close harmonies, which can be considered dissonant to some ears who are more accustomed to listening to either Western classical music or even, American folk music. There's lots of close seconds and microtonal intervals and wild ornaments and asymmetric rhythms that are rooted in dance, folk dance steps. So there's a lot of richness in this material.
Before you joined Kitka, had you been a singer before, and did you study classically or what have you?
So I was actually trained as a classical oboe and English horn player. While in university as an undergraduate, I was lucky enough to attend Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, on a full scholarship as a classical oboe player, because they needed an oboist in their orchestra. But while there, I discovered their ethnomusicology and contemporary music programs, which are very, very well known and they were very, very ahead of their time back in the early 80s when I was an undergrad there. And so while in college, my mind and ears were just blown open by non-Western classical music traditions, everything from Ghanaian high life music to South Indian Carnatic music to Javanese gamelan, and on and on and on. And I was probably the most unfocused undergrad that ever passed through that university's doors because I just ate it all up. I also got really interested in contemporary classical and experimental music while I was there, and got particularly interested in composers like Meredith Monk and Joan LaBarbera, folks who were using their voices in extended ways. Just loved that music. So the way I fell into Balkan music, which was actually my gateway to Kitka's work, was a fellow ethnomusicology graduate student said, well, if you love the sounds of Meredith Monk and of these other women who are doing wild things with their voices, you got to hear this. And he handed me a cassette. And the cassette just said Bulgarian. And I was like, okay, Bulgarian. I put it in my cassette player because that's how we listened to music back in 1986. And it was as if I was struck by lightning. It was just such an amazing, impactful listening experience. And what it was two Bulgarian women from the Shop region, which is in western Bulgaria, singing a traditional harvest song in super tight, close, strident harmony. It literally just, I had tears streaming down my face. I was like, this is the stuff. Take me to this music.
Cion
from their album Nectar. That was Kitka performing a Bulgarian piece, De Foiko Mari Kechubafa. This show is Classical Austin. I'm Diane Donovan, and at this time I'm chatting with the executive and artistic director of Kitka, Shira Cion. On Tuesday, February 17th, KMFA will have one of its midday concerts featuring Kitka, singing in this style. It's tricky.
It's tricky, but it's also profoundly satisfying because it's a very embodied kind of athletic form of singing that's rooted in outdoor, field work, outdoor rituals. So there's a lot of projection in it. And it's interesting, many women in particular were sort of part of the second wave of feminism and women's empowerment get drawn to these singing styles purely because it's a new way for women to raise their voices in a very powerful, fully embodied way. And Kitka has started a number of community choirs in the San Francisco Bay Area. And it's incredible how it attracts women who are finding this mode of vocal practice a way of empowering themselves and their voices even beyond just the rehearsal room. And it requires a lot of discipline because most of us in the ensemble are American born. We weren't raised in villages with mothers and grandmothers and aunties who sang this way. So we've had to really study closely and dig in deeply and unlearn a lot of what we learned from our high school choral directors about how to sing correctly and let go of these notions that, if you sing this way, you're going to ruin your voice. It's actually quite the contrary. It's a very natural way of singing. And I think it also is a style of singing that the sum being more of its parts because it's a very overtone-rich style of singing.
When you do commission a work from a contemporary composer from the Balkan region or what have you, does it sound much like the earlier pieces, American classical, if you go back 200 years here, and then you go to today, the music's quite different?
Yeah. So we've learned from a lot of experience working with a wide range of composers how to be very specific in sort of our wish list of a new composer because, our singers within the ensemble are incredibly versatile, and we have singers in the group who do sing opera or Baroque music or indie pop or madrigals. But the Kitka sound is a very distinctive sound, and so when we work with a composer, we really encourage them to utilize our sonic palette. And we often will send recordings of each singer's voice and sort of what their superpowers are.
We are all looking forward to your performance at KMFA. I have been speaking with the executive and artistic director of Kitka, Shira Cion. Thank you for spending time with us today on Classical Austin.
We are so excited and can't wait to come to your beautiful city. Thank you, Diane.
That was Hop Ida Titsan, a Hungarian song as performed by Kitka. And just a reminder, Kitka will be performing in the Draylen Mason Music Studio for one of our noonday concerts on February the 17th. It's free, but you might want to reserve your seat now. As many of our listeners know, KMFA stands for Classical Music for All, using a K in that. Yes. And we do have a diverse group of listeners. A case in point, Jack Hues of the 80s English superband Wang Chung, a band he formed with Nick Feldman, is one of our listeners. And through the 80s, they had some huge hits, including Dance Hall Days, Everybody Have Fun Tonight, and Let's Go, to name a few. And he is in our studio right now. Welcome, Jack Hues.
Thank you, Diane. Great to be here.
It's wonderful to see you. Full disclosure, I'm a huge fan. I'll tamp that down just to have a normal-ish conversation. And a few years ago, a contingent from KMFA went to a Wang Chung concert in Kyle, and we were the dancing fools. There were a lot of dancers, but we were the dancing fools.
That's wonderful. Well, that's really great that you were there.
I do want to let folks know that you had a passion early on for classical music.
Yeah.
You attended London's Goldsmiths College to study music, and then you were at the Royal College of Music.
Yes.
And you've also written scores for films, To Live and Die in L.A., The Guardian, and others. I would want to know, what brought you to classical music? Talk about your journey early on, even before you had your hits and things. What were you interested in musically, and how did that change over the years?
I grew up in a sort of working class household. My dad was a saxophone player and very into jazz, but not the sort of avant-garde stuff that I became interested in so much as a slightly calmer version of jazz, like Stan Getz was his hero, And so jazz was there, but I think I was very fortunate to be 7, 8 years old when the Beatles arrived, and I remember distinctly the experience of hearing their music for the first time and thinking this is my music. My father likes what he likes, Yeah. Not that I didn't like what my dad did. I was always interested in the albums that he had. There was a Paul Desmond album called Take 10, I think, which I really loved that track. And, so it wasn't like it wasn't totally Freudian, the rejection, But the Beatles definitely set me off on a path. And I think the path was to try and figure out how they did it, So I sort of asked for a guitar for Christmas, I think, my 8th, because I'm born around Christmas, around my 8th birthday. And my dad agreed on the condition that I had proper guitar lessons, as he called them, So in those days, it was like an hour-long lesson. Half of it was music theory, half of it was playing kind of classical guitar. And the teacher I had was an old lady, although she's probably much younger than I am now, but she seemed old at the time. And she didn't teach me in a kind of she wasn't heavy on technique, if you know what I mean, which was a sort of good and a bad thing, But she kind of let me, find my own way a bit. And she helped me with the sheet music to Beatles songs, which was, the lessons were a means to an end, really, But anyway, to cut a long story short, by the time I sort of got to the end of school, I had, in the UK, you have grade exams for instruments. I don't know what you have here, but I had grade 8 guitar, which is like the top sort of grade, and I could read music, and I had a fair understanding of, well, I say that I didn't have any understanding of music history, really, do you know what I mean? But I found certain things interesting, And back in those days, going to university, my parents hadn't been to university, so they wanted me to go. I thought, well, if I've got to go, then I'll study music. And the only way to study music was to study classical music. There were no jazz courses. There may have been one at the Royal Academy, but I wasn't good enough, really, to get onto that, So I got this place at Goldsmiths College, and my goal then, and as it was all the way through, really, was composition, like writing songs. And then, because rock music went through this very interesting phase of progressive rock, and bands like Chicago, for example, had a more or less classical side of one of their double albums, and bands like, I remember going to see Yes, and they played Stravinsky's Firebird at the beginning of their set, which blew me away, just hearing it loud and stuff. So there was always this sort of, and I guess in 1970 the musical genres were about as close as they ever got, really, So progressive rock, the legacy of Sgt. Pepper and that sort of Beatles album, there was a sort of openness, I think, especially in the classical fraternity, to the idea of rock music being, a proper artistic force rather than just commercial trash sort of thing.
That's true. I never thought of it that way. I was thinking maybe we're getting closer now, certainly more classical musicians that we know are, learning to improvise or trying to improvise.
Well, that's
bring in
sure.
other elements. That has changed a bit. On this musical journey, you wanted to study composition. I would say the pop rock or new wave music of Wang Chung is quite sophisticated. It's like that's a change there. The modulations and such. Yeah. Very exciting. Yeah. So you were studying classical, and then the Beatles had influenced you to go to find your voice in the popular form. Was that a hard choice, or did you see it as an open-ended thing?
No, it was kind of just automatic. It was, I think again it's hard to appreciate now how central the Beatles were to the cultural experience of growing up in the UK as Sgt. Pepper came out when I was 12 years old, so I was a little young to really understand it, but musically it was really so sort of central because it presented you with this alternative kind of art form, if you like. They began obviously as very mainstream, and and that was great for an 8-year-old, to see them on the Raw Variety performance and doing their thing. But they took you on this journey, which was powered by the fact that they did write their own material. So the record company didn't have the control over them that they were used to having with previous artists who were performers of other people's music,
And certainly George Martin brought in a lot of the classical elements.
He was an incredible facilitator for them. Yeah.
Who are your favorite composers, and what specifically about their music, if you can name a few, and what you love about the music?
Well, I suppose the composer that was there were two really, the sort of tipping points for me. One was Alban Berg, and the violin concerto in particular. The strangeness of it really sort of attracted me, but there's also that kind of how it moves into the hymn tune, Es ist genug, isn't it? And I found that fascinating.
Here is a segment of the violin concerto Memory of an Angel, which Berg wrote when Mahler's daughter died at the age of 18. Near the end of the work, he borrows a cantata by J.S. Bach, BWV number 60, Es ist genug, or It is enough. Leonidas Kavakos was the violinist performing with the BBC Symphony Orchestra as led by Andrew Davis. That was just part of Alban Berg's Violin Concerto to the Memory of an Angel. A favorite of my guest at this time, Jack Hues. Some of you will know that he is one of the founders of the big pop new wave group Wang Chung. He lives in Austin and he is a classical music and KMFA fan. It was fascinating how Berg used Bach's cantata BWV 60, which already came with certain amounts of dissonance. Jack Hues, you wanted to mention another composer who has influenced you.
And the other composer was Luciano Berio, and his Sinfonia still moves me every time I hear that third movement, the one that's based on the Mahler symphony. You know, and Berio in general, I think, really stimulated me, and because it wasn't so. It didn't have the austerity of Boulez or even Stockhausen in a way. It had this sort of fundamentally. The tonality was still there, if you know what I mean. But his ability to create these sort of sound worlds, like in the double piano concerto and in Voces in particular, but Sinfonia. So those composers sort of really kind of took me out of the kind of sort of rock music meets classical music area, because there's a whole area of music that's sort of friendly to both fields.
Right.
And these composers were definitely challenging. And they were the ones that really pushed me into thinking, no, I want to do composition and I want to have the opportunity to study this stuff, But then, of course, I liked the classic Viennese, Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms in particular, and Schubert a huge amount. And the Schubert songs over the years started to really sort of speak to me.
So lyrical, yeah.
Yeah.
And I assume, but you can tell me if I'm wrong, I assume that classical music has influenced your own music, even within the pop or new wave genre. Is that right?
Yeah, certainly. It's right to say Wang Chung. I was trying to, so I went through music college and the Royal College of Music. Came out of college in '77, I think it was. And which was right around the time that punk was breaking in the UK, And I think by that time I kind of sort of had enough of the kind of academic approach to music, And punk seemed incredibly liberating, And the Sex Pistols album, I loved it. And it's the way it sounded, if you know what I mean, and the kind of the expression of a certain level of aggression, if you know what I mean. And. So I suppose when I came out of music college, the one thing they don't prepare you for is the real world in any way, And because I wasn't an orchestral player or, the usual channels weren't open. So being a composer, it's like, well, how do you do that? And it's all about networks, obviously, But because I didn't have that kind of, if you like, middle-class upbringing, for want of a better term for it, where you sort of grew up with other kids who were doing classical music, or your parents knew a conductor or something, that I couldn't really see the way through to it. So I sort of gravitated back to rock music. And I suppose I'd always kept, I bought all the Bowie albums that came out when I was at music college, because I always felt that he was artistically so kind of sophisticated and advanced, and albums like Low and Heroes are still masterpieces, I think, of the genre, and bring in all kinds of interesting stuff through Brian Eno, the producer on that. Yeah.
Since Wang Chung, and I know that you get together for concerts again, you've written and performed in a variety of settings, including with the jazz quintet. You already talked about what the jazz masters bring to you, but then you did something really cool. In 2019, Wang Chung released an album with the City of Prague Philharmonic Orchestra, Orchesography, wherein your hits were arranged for orchestra. What was that process like? And did you do all of the arranging, you and Nick, or how did that work?
We worked with an arranger,
yeah,
because it's a sort of it's a particular skill, if you like, But I think, we persuaded this record company who put up the money to do a complete album rather than just the hits, which is what they initially wanted to do. So that gave us a bit of agency to choose some tracks that would benefit from the orchestral experience, if you like. And I guess I tried to sort of keep it away from just being like strings, sort of gushy strings, if you know what I mean. And I tried to use more sort of woodwind instruments and try to get more of a kind of Stravinsky kind of edge in there. I'm not sure we totally succeeded, but I think certain songs like Overwhelming Feeling, which is a song on our final Wang Chung, well, not final, but the last one we released in 2012. We released this album called Taser Up, and there's a track called Overwhelming Feeling, which is okay on that album, but really good on the orchestral album.
Yeah. That one really seems to be a nod to Sgt. Pepper and the orchestral music in that work.
And then things like To Live and Die in LA have a quasi-orchestral feel to them anyway, and we just sort of expanded that. So I did work with the arranger, but I let him do the kind of, how can I say, there's a sort of certain technical skill just to make it all work so that on the day when they press record, the orchestra sounds great.
This show is Classical Austin. I'm Diane Donovan, and at this time I'm chatting with Jack Hues, composer, singer, and of the amazing pop group that was founded in the 80s, Wang Chung. The music business has changed so much in the last 40 to 50 years. Can you talk about those changes?
Yes. When I signed to Geffen Records in Los Angeles in, 1983, I think it was, it was a very clear commercial model, where the record company basically owned your recordings and paid you not very much. But on the other hand, they fronted a lot of money to make the record, So we were in Abbey Road, Studio 2, where the Beatles made all their albums for kind of 7 or 8 months, just lockout, which cost a fortune, And then they were making videos because we arrived as MTV started up. So, videos in those days cost sort of anything from $200,000 to $500,000, depending on where you were filming and what sort of, So it was a huge investment that the record companies made. Of course, they made it all back from your royalties and so on. But it required a sort of level of belief, and I think that then fueled the trust of the radio stations to play your music and stuff. Obviously, you've got to have the good product. I hate the word product, but you've got to have good songs and so on, for it all to work. But there was a sort of machine in place that was, by the mid-'80s, was very well oiled, and it sort of worked well, and it certainly served Wang Chung really well, That has now become obviously completely fractured. Records, back in the 80s, records were how you made your money, basically, and touring was an expensive business that you sort of did to promote the albums, And now it's the other way around, you make the money touring and you sell the albums as a sort of memento, if you like, And I sort of lament that in a way, but I get that it's all, music is always being technology-driven, whether it's making violins in Venice or, grand pianos in Germany, it's and those things push the music in a certain direction. So I don't sort of feel bad about it, but I do feel pain, if you like, for young bands who are trying to get some sort of financial framework for what they're doing.
That's what my next question was going to be. What advice would you give an individual musician or a band just trying to get their foot in the door, and where is that door?
Yeah, it's hard, I think, the friend with whom I worked a lot with the jazz projects I did in Canterbury, Sam Bailey, he's very kind of, experimental pianist. He's kind of like, it's great, I can make an album in an afternoon in my piano, I can put it out the next day, do you know what I mean, and then move on to the next thing, And I see that's kind of like great, but he makes his money out of teaching and other sort of activities, And I think if I'd had to sort of split my time in that way, I'm not sure that we could have got the coherence that Wang Chung had, even though I say coherence, Wang Chung's a very eclectic sort of band, really, the different influences we took in, But, advice to young musicians. I would say you still, the one thing that is needed, and I don't think AI will ever supply it, is the next unique song that represents the presence of the person who wrote it, and there's no end to the demand for that, So if you've got great ideas, that there's a way through it, and as long as you keep the intellectual property rights, if you like, to what you're doing, and so far copyright is still something that's intact. I don't know how long that goes on for, but all the time you have that.
Will there be artificial intelligence property?
I mean, AI is interesting. At the moment it's very imitative, and obviously that's kind of no interest really to proper creative people. It can be an adjunct to creativity, I suppose. But at the point where it starts to become consciousness, well, that's a whole other discussion in a sense. But I guess it gets interesting at that point.
Well, what inspires you right now musically?
I try and sort of listen to all kinds of different stuff. I think I spent about 7 or 8 years teaching songwriting in Canterbury at the university there. The great thing about that was that I got to hear the music the students were all listening to, and I heard some great music through that. There was a band called The Books, which were fascinating, and so I guess now I hear the music that my stepdaughters are listening to. They're really into sort of K-pop and that sort of thing. Doesn't do a great deal for me, sadly. But there's sort of tracks that sort of come through. I guess it feels like there's no longer a real sort of cutting edge in terms of evolving a style that is like, what's the word, sort of representative of the generation, if you like. It seems like they're more in a sort of supermarket of different possibilities, and they choose whichever thing they happen to want to put on that day, But there's a good and a bad side to that. I think it works very well for Wang Chung because, we're part of this sort of stream of music, from 1956 to the present sort of thing, People, find Wang Chung and some of them get really fascinated by it, So
As well they should.
Yes.
Well, is there anything that you have not yet done in the music world that you're just dying to do?
I guess we have talked about performing the orchestrography album live with an orchestra. I would love to do that. It's obviously a sort of expensive thing to set up, but I think it could work really well. So that's something. Last year we were on tour with Rick Springfield, and we played at the Hollywood Bowl. We'd never done that before, so that was a real kind of achievement. And so there are still things, a hit. I don't think I think too much about that sort of bucket list of things you want to achieve, And I'm still as fascinated by creating music as ever. I've released 2 solo albums in the last 5 years, and I've got a third one complete now that I want to release this year, And they represent my sort of musical, the spectrum, if that's the right word, of musical interests that I have, So I love working in that realm. I still love sitting down and writing music, whether it turns into a song or whether it becomes the basis for like a more improvisational sort of thing, and then how these projects sort of materialize, and you try and conceptualize it into a space and put it out there and see if people get into it.
I did want to get back to, you mentioned videos, and that was, you were right there at the time of the videos. I read or heard somewhere that Everybody Have Fun Tonight, banned by the BBC. That video, which is one of my favorite videos of all time, and I'm not a big lover of videos, but that one, anytime I just need to pick me up, I put it on, I get so excited. So why did they ban it?
They banned it because of that very fast cutting. They said could cause epilepsy in people who were prone to that. I've never heard of anybody being plunged into an epileptic fit, but I don't know whether that was a sort of slightly spurious reason, you know. I think with Wang Chung, you know, because we sort of left the UK effectively and signed direct to Geffen Records, and I think maybe at the BBC there was a bit of a sense of like,
Oh, yeah.
gone off to America, they can do it over there, you know. But I'm probably sort of being slightly paranoid about that, you know. But I think it probably was some BBC doctor looked at it and thought, this is outrageous.
That's so funny. And you are still performing with Wang Chung. I know as we talk right now, you have some performances in New Orleans. Is that with Wang Chung?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So all of the live stuff that I do at the moment is with Wang Chung, you know. Last month, really. We did a show in Los Angeles where we performed the entire To Live and Die in LA soundtrack and we didn't show the movie consecutively, if you know, in the sense of just showing the movie and trying to play along with the soundtrack because it's so fragmented the way the music's used. But we sort of reversed the focus in a sense and put the focus on the soundtrack itself and used the visuals with extracts from the movie and interspersed it with some commentary from Bill Friedkin and created this sort of evening, sort of immersive evening, which people really loved. You know, it was kind of a bit of an experiment for us, but I felt it represented the band in a really cool way. So I would love to do some more of that in this coming year, you know, in the sort of probably the bigger cities in the States.
Do you have some performance date planning it?
We're sort of planning on a sort of US tour in the summer, sort of probably July, August sort of time, I think, you know. So there's not so much going on then, but as always with me, there's plenty to be doing. And as I say, I'd love to get this solo album out into the world. We're also working on a release, because it was the 40th anniversary of To Live and Die in LA last year. And we're finally working with Interscope to produce a double album, sort of like 40th anniversary edition of the soundtrack, plus some remixes that were done at the time, plus some demos that we did that never made it into the film. So that could be an interesting release, you know. And from there, I think we'll be re-releasing the Wang Chung albums in these sort of deluxe editions, I suppose you'd call it, you know, more collectible editions.
I want to thank you so much for coming in today to chat with us on KMFA.
Yeah.
Jack Hues, of course, of Wang Chung, composer, guitarist, artist, really. And we cannot thank you enough for taking the time today, and we hope you keep on listening to KMFA.
I certainly will. It's every car journey. It's
someday maybe a concert here.
Yes, would love that. Yeah, it's doing some hybrid of what I do. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diane. I really appreciate it.
I was very excited to do that interview with Jack Hues of Wang Chung. He has a lot of classical music that influences what he does.